Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. You probably know that there are a lot of great apps available today that you could use to sharpen and reduce noise in your image. If you follow my channel, you know I've done a lot of videos on different apps that do just that. One thing I think that's getting overlooked though is that Lightroom actually does do a very good job on sharpening and noise reduction, and in most instances, Lightroom will probably work fine. Now, over the years, I've experimented with different sharpening and noise reduction techniques in Lightroom, and I think I've kind of refined my process so that it works really well, and I'd like to share it with you in this video and explain how sharpening and noise reduction works in Lightroom. Now, of course, if you're in Lightroom in the Develop module, the Detail tab has everything you need, sharpening and noise reduction. And what I would recommend you do is that you work this tab from the bottom up. Start by removing color noise first, then luminance noise, then sharpen the image afterward. I found that that usually works best, not so much the algorithms in Lightroom, but actually just your eyes, the way you're looking at the image. Get rid of the noise first, get rid of the color noise first, and then you could more effectively remove the luminance noise. And then once you do that, you could most effectively sharpen the image. So that's my finding. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to kind of zoom in on the image first. And you, of course, could just click on the image and zoom in. There is also a little navigator window. If you click on this little triangle here and roll it open, you can see that there's a navigator window here. You could drag this around, or you could click this little tool right here, and then you could click on the image itself and center that navigator window where you want it. Now, in my opinion, the navigator window just isn't big enough for me. It just doesn't cut it. So I always keep that closed and I zoom in on the image. Now, usually when you click and zoom, you're only zooming at 100%. And if you have a really high resolution image like this one, it's not going to zoom in that much. So what I prefer to do is hold in the Command or Control key and then just draw a box on the image where you want to zoom in. Now I could zoom in and really see the noise and how sharp the image is. Now, I mentioned we're going to work this Detail tab from the bottom up. So we're going to get rid of color noise first. And if you look at the image, you could see that there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of like blue dots. I think the blue dots jump out, but also there's also red dots and green dots, and that's color noise. And very simply, all you need to do is take this color slider and slowly move it to the right, and you'll be surprised. Watch the color dots as I slowly move this to the right. You'll see they just disappear very quickly. Look at that. Not much of a movement. At 7, it looks like they're all gone. Now, many cameras, RAW files, when you import them in Lightroom, they're going to default the color value to 25. You may want to make sure that you don't just accept that, because it's probably too much. As you could see, I got rid of the noise on this image, or the color noise on this image, at around 7 or 8. So just do it there. You might want to drag the image around and just make sure that it did remove the color noise, especially in the darkest areas. That's where you're going to see the most color noise. Then once you're satisfied with that, you could take a look at the 2 sliders below it, Detail and Smoothness. Now, Detail, sometimes when you remove color noise, you're kind of blurring it slightly. This Detail tab will help you bring back that sharpness if you move it to the right. Now, it's a subtle adjustment down here in the color section. So kind of look at the bird's feathers maybe in here. And as I move it to the right, you'll see that they'll switch slightly. And I'll move it to the left. Can you see that? All the way left, all the way right, all the way left, all the way right, all the way left, all the way right. Maybe look around the bird's eye. Hopefully you could see that in the video. All the way left, all the way right. Now, smoothness, it should be, in my opinion, probably called anti-smoothness, because it works backwards from what you think. If you move it to the right, you're making it less smooth. So in in this instance, you're actually kind of making it sharper. So if I move it to the right, it's sharper. If I move it to the left, it's not as sharp. Now this is a more subtle adjustment. Maybe look in here. So it's not a big like adjustment, these two sliders, as it applies to color noise reduction. So you could see that all the way up, all the way down, all the way up, all the way down. So you could kind of move these around and try to see if you could just bring back some of that sharpness. Sometimes when you do that, you'll start to reintroduce some of the color noise. I see a couple blue dots up there. So I'll just move that a little more to the right to help eliminate those color dots that I saw. So that's really as simple as it is to reduce the noise reduction as far as the color side is concerned. Now the luminance side. Again, I like to zoom in just like this, look at the noise, and I like to look at a part of the image that should be very sharp. In the case of wildlife, as an animal, the eye, right? We want the eye really sharp. So we're going to go to the luminance noise reduction, and we'll just keep moving that to the right. And you can see that it just kind of smooths out all that noise. But in doing so, look what it's doing to the bird itself. You're losing some of the sharpness of the bird. So it's just kind of smoothing everything out. Now, this is where those aftermarket apps like Denoise AI, Pure Raw, and pretty soon On1 is coming out with a noise reduction application as well. This is where it will get rid of all those that grainy looking noise without sacrificing sharpening. So that's where those actually work better in Lightroom. But there is something in Lightroom that will help you bring back that sharpness. So what you should do is move this luminance slider to the right till you just smooth it out enough. Now remember, you're really zoomed in. So if you move back out, it doesn't look as bad, right? But when you're zoomed in, it's more dramatic. This detail slider, that will, again, like the detail slider in the color section of the noise reduction part of this tab, will bring back detail when you move it to the right. So you can see as I move it to the right, see how it's bringing back that feather detail? If I move it to the left, you're removing that detail. So that's a little more dramatic of a shift than the detail slider that's in the color section. Okay, so you could see that. So we could bring back some of that sharpness. Now we start getting a little bit more noise. You can see there's a little bit of artifacting up there, but again, when you're zoomed in, everything's magnified. When you're zoomed out, it's not even noticeable. Contrast, similarly, if you move that to the right, you'll start to bring back some. This actually should be called micro contrast, in my opinion. If you look at the background, which was very noisy until I moved the luminance slider to smooth it out, if I move the contrast slider to the right, you'll see how it's starting to add micro contrast around what was the noise in the background. So that is just kind of bringing out more detail, but in effect, at times, especially on an image like this that had a lot of noise, it's going to bring back something that looks like noise. All right, so we want to probably avoid moving this slider too much. Try to rescue your detail with that detail slider more so than this contrast slider in most instances. Now remember, you don't have to get all your sharpening back with this slider. We have the sharpening section of the tab to work on as well. So we don't have to worry about making sure we get all that sharpness back right away. Just bring back enough before we start introducing some artifacts up here in the background. Maybe just back it off. All right, so just like that. So we've reduced noise, color noise and luminance noise in the image, just like that. Now, let's talk about sharpening. And I'm going to come off this image just for a minute to try to give you an idea of what sharpening actually does, what these sliders do. And to do that, I'm going to go to this set of monochrome bars. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to again hold in the Command key on my Mac, Control key on a PC, and zoom in kind of in here. All right, maybe, you know what? We're going to zoom in even more. Zoom in like this, like a lot. All right, now we're looking at this transition edge from a darker gray bar to a lighter gray bar. And you can see that there's some lines in there. Those are just like artifacts from the JPEG, from the compression of the JPEG. There's nothing I could do about those. In reality, this should be a uniform dark gray bar butted up against a uniform lighter gray bar compared to it. So that's what we see here. Now let's look at what happens when we move these sliders. What you're doing when you're adding sharpening is you're actually just adding contrast to edges. And to show that, I'll move this amount slider to the right and watch the edge right where the gray bar, the darker gray bar, touches the lighter gray bar. And you can see that it's just making the darker gray bar a little darker and the lighter gray bar a little lighter. So it's adding contrast right at that edge, and that in effect is sharpening. Now what do these other sliders do? Let's go to radius. If I move that to the right, it's making that area where it made the darker gray bar edge a little darker, it's making it bigger, a bigger radius. Whereas the lighter gray bar, it's making that one larger as well. If I move it to left, it's making those smaller. So you're increasing or decreasing the radius of the edge that gets that micro contrast added to it. Now, in a real world application, let's say you have a macro photograph of a peach. I mean, a really tight photograph. And you have the fine little hairs on the peach fuzz shown in the image. You may, in that instance, want a smaller radius because those hairs are really fine. On the other hand, if you just have a landscape image, default might be fine because it's not going to make much difference. So what you really need to do is zoom in like I did here and move this around and see where it looks most pleasing, and then often zoom back out so that you could see the image like as it should be, and make sure that this radius adjustment is adjusted properly. Now the detail slider, if I move that to the right, it just doesn't change the radius, but it kind of does the same thing the amount slider does. It just makes the darker part darker and the lighter part lighter. If I move it to left, it dials it back. So you could see what that does. Now masking, I'm going to explain in a moment because it's hard to show in this image of the monochrome bars. So hopefully this gives you an idea what these top three sliders do. Again, amount just at the very transition edge, it just makes the darker edge darker, the lighter edge lighter. Radius makes the edge wider, and detail does almost exactly like amount does, maybe a little more dramatic. Makes the darker even darker, the lighter even lighter. So you're adding more sharpness when you move it to the right. Now let's go back to the image of the bird. All right, again, we're going to zoom in, right? Not that much. Let's hold in the command key again on my Mac and zoom in like that. Okay, now, again, you could zoom in when you do these adjustments, and then what you're doing is when you move this amount slider and you move it to the right, you're just adding that kind of contrast to the edges. Now when you're doing that, see how we're kind of increasing the noise? So then you might want to jump back down to Luminance and play with that a little bit. Luminance noise reduction, I should say, and move that to the right. So you could just kind of move those edge to edge, see what it does. Radius, remember we're going to increase the radius of that high contrast edge we just added with the sharpening slider when I move that to the right. So you could see how it just kind of really makes it kind of sharper when I move it that way. Less sharp to the left in this instance. So just find a happy place for that. Detail is kind of does the same thing the amount slider does. It just makes it sharper. But look, it's really introducing this kind of weird digital noise that we don't want. So we might want to just back that one off. All right. So we'll just kind of find a happy medium. Again, zoom back out and see what it looks like. And you could turn this entire detail tab off with that little switch right there, and that will give you a better idea of how you're doing on the image. So I think that looks pretty good right there. Now masking, typically you don't need to sharpen the entire image. You don't need to sharpen every pixel, right? We just need to sharpen the bird. We don't necessarily need to even sharpen parts of the bird that are uniform, like the edge of this part of the beak here, or maybe the iris part in here, that doesn't really need to be sharpened, just the edge. And the background, we don't really need to sharpen. So what masking does, it will remove sharpening from smoother areas where there isn't a lot of like contrast between edges. Now, the best way to see masking is hold the Alt or Option key in on your keyboard. Alt if you have a PC, Option if you have a Mac. And when you do that and then click on the slider, you'll get a totally white image when the masking slider is all the way to the left. That means every single pixel is being sharpened. As I start to move it to the right, you'll see black start being introduced. Wherever black is, that's where we're not sharpening anything. So if I keep moving it to the right, you'll see that I'm starting to remove the sharpening from the smoother areas, and I'm just concentrating on those edges. Now, why you want to do this is, remember when we were zoomed in and I was moving like the radius slider to the right and this detail slider to the right, I was introducing this weird digital noise, and it was most noticeable in the background. You can see the background, it's not there because we're not applying any sharpening there. Now it is on the bird because we are applying sharpening to the edges of the bird. So you could better apply sharpening exactly where you want it applied when you use this masking slider. And I suggest you are zoomed out when you're doing this masking adjustment. Hold in that Alt Option key and do it so it's just getting the edges. Now I know I was on Instagram and I saw an ad for a person that was selling a Lightroom course. Now I can't comment how good his course is, but the little ad was him sharpening an image, and what he did is he moved masking so it was just the edges, and then he took the amount slider all the way up. Now you may want to try that. In this case here, you can see this weird digital noise I'm getting, so I don't think it works well on this image, but I'm not going to discount what he's teaching. I just want to bring that up, that if you stumble across that, don't think that that's a formula that you could do on every single image. As you saw in this image, it just didn't look right. So you'd prefer probably not to do that on everything. Just, pick and choose and see what works. Now to help you sharpen, that little Alt Option trick I did with the masking, it also works on the other three sliders as well. So if I hold in the Alt Option and click on the amount slider, I get a black and white image. Sometimes it's easier to sharpen when you're just looking at a monochrome image. So you could better see the edges, kind of get that color out of there so it doesn't like muddy things up, for lack of a better term. And it also works with radius, but in a slightly different way. You get this kind of weird look where you could see edges better. And you could see as you move it, you could see you're getting thicker edges, right? That's what radius did. So you could kind of maybe get a better adjustment that way. Same thing with detail. Hold that Alt Option key in, and you get that same kind of weird kind of edge look that you could do with detail as well. Now personally, I don't do that with the Alt Option key on the amount, radius, or detail slider. I only do it with the masking slider. That's where I find that it works best. Now I'm going to back off radius on here. I'm going to now sharpen this like the way I normally would. Something like that. And then if we do a before after, there's before and there's after. So it really does do a pretty good job of doing noise reduction and sharpening. Now, I will say that those aftermarket applications probably do a better job for especially higher ISO images like this one is. But if you just have, a quick thing you need to get done, this works fine. You don't have to take the time to send the image into, denoise AI or pure raw, or I forgot what the On1's noise reduction is going to be called. That's coming out. As I'm making this video, it's supposed to be coming out in 2 days. And I'm looking forward to checking that out as well. But in many instances, Lightroom noise reduction will work fine. Now, in closing, I just want to talk about this Alt Option thing again. I used it, or I showed how you could use it for all 4 sliders in the sharpening section. It also works for the 3 sliders in this Luminance section of the noise reduction. Again, if you zoom in and you hold in the Alt Option key and click on the Luminance noise reduction, you could see you get this black and white image. If I hold in the Alt option and click on the detail, I get the same black and white image. If I hold the Alt option and click on the contrast, I get the same black and white image. So it does work on those three as well. You may find that that helps you better remove noise in an image when you do that. It does not work, or as I recall, it does. Yeah, it doesn't work on these three, only on the Luminance noise reduction ones. So that is hopefully everything you need to know to more effectively sharpen and reduce noise in your images using Lightroom. Thank you everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.